Hello. Today I'm going to share a story with you of God's faithful provision. That's what we're focusing on in this season. We've got a whole series of stories of people sharing their testimonies of how God showed up and showed off in their lives to provide for them. So today I'm going to share one of my personal stories with you about a season several years ago that my family and I walked through and how God showed up, okay? So this is honestly one of my really core kind of favorite ones that I go back to. This is one of the first ways that the Lord showed up this obviously for me in a way that like it was undeniably him. Okay, this is one of the first moments in my life that was like I can really look back and go like, oh my word, like that was like 110% God. I had like literally I could not have contrived that or made this happen. Like it was God. So let's set the scene. So basically this happened in late 2019, so several years ago. I was married. My husband and I had been married for 3 years at that point, and we had a young baby, a daughter our daughter was like 9 months old, and my husband had just lost his job. My husband lost his job in September of that year. And so I think this happened in like September or October that this got, or might have been a little bit later actually. So my husband had lost his job, had been a few months now. We had used all of our savings. We had used up all of our kind of like emergency prep stockpile of groceries. We lived in this tiny little apartment, so we didn't have space for like some sort of like emergency food storage. At the time it was tiny. The apartment itself was only like 840 square feet. The kitchen was teeny. There was no storage. So, we had our cupboards. I kept a pretty good stock. My goal was to always keep about a month of food on hand, but it had been several months. So we had now like worked through everything. Okay. So our savings are gone, and we literally, our cupboards were bare. Okay, so that's what happened. My husband had finally started working for a local company, but he was severely underemployed at that point, meaning like his hours were wonky. He was getting maybe minimum wage. I don't know if he was even making minimum wage. Like it wasn't enough to live on. It was like barely enough to pay rent. Not to mention bills and groceries and all those things. And to be honest, when I look back at this season, I look back at our budgets in this season, and because I track our budgets. And I can tell you every month we were in the red. Like I literally, still looking back in the season, I'm like, I literally have no idea other than God. Like God is the only explanation for how we somehow managed to be able to pay rent and not get kicked out of our apartment and not get our lights turned off on us. Like somehow the money would be there when we needed to pay the bills. But it was a crazy, very tight, challenging season. So that was the season we're in. And this particular day, we were at the point where we literally were run out of food. We had eaten like all the pasta, all the beans, all the rice, everything in the cupboards. My fridge literally had like some condiments and some baby food. My daughter at this point, she was breastfeeding, but she also was eating baby food. So we had some jars of baby food, enough to get her through for another week or so, about a week's worth of baby food. But we had no like big people food, no like regular food. None. I'm talking none. Like cupboards bare. And I remember opening the fridge that morning. It was morning. We were getting ready to go to our next thing. We only had one car at the time. And my husband was going to go to work, and he was going to drop me off at my parents' house for the day with my daughter before he went to work. Because that's what we were doing a lot of in that season, as well as I just spent a lot of time at my parents' house with my baby. And I just opened the cupboard thinking like I need to make breakfast, and there's nothing. And so I was like, okay. And of course, naturally my first instinct was to start stressing. Of course. Like, cause duh. I'm like a human. I'm pretty sure like pretty much any human would have that first natural instinct was to like start stressing out, right? And freaking out. But I paused. And part of this was the Lord, like a couple months beforehand, the Lord had brought me into a season of doing some intense work on my mental state and my faith and stuff like that. And I'm actually share that story too, because that's a whole nother God story about how he ended up showing up and providing that season. But I had started this program, this coaching program, a few months before. And so I was already in this state of, I had been really working on taking thoughts captive and staying in a state of trust and peace with the Lord. And this was a really practical opportunity to apply that. So open the fridge, empty, cupboards empty. First natural, of course, gut reaction is going to be like, oh my gosh, and freak out and have panic attack, right? But the feeling rose up, and I took a really deep breath, and I took that thought captive, right? The thought of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? There's no food. How are we going to handle this? Whatever the freak out spiral wanted to be. I consciously took hold of that thought, and I paused, and I was like, that's what this looks like. And I turned it into a prayer, and I said, God, you know what's going on. You see this. You see that we have no food in the cupboard. But I trust you. So thank you. Thank you that you are providing for our needs. You know that we need food. Thank you that you're providing for our needs. You're providing food. I don't know how we're going to pay it. Bank account's basically empty. I don't know how we're going to go buy groceries. We don't have the money to go buy groceries right now. But I trust you, Lord, that you're going to either provide what we need to eat today or give us the strength to fast until it's time to eat. Maybe we need to fast right now. So that you'll give us the strength to fast, or you're going to provide food to eat when it's time to eat. So thank you. I'm going to stay in this place of trust and expectation and gratitude, knowing that you are going to show up and you are going to provide for us, whatever that looks like. And so I had that moment inside my head praying. So I was able to stay in a state of peace. And so then when my husband came out, getting ready to go to work, I was able to let him know what the situation was in terms of no breakfast this morning. But be in a place of peace to help him then also walk in a state of peace. And this is something I want to point out really fast. As the woman of the home, as the woman, and as a wife, and as a mother, my role and your role is the thermostat. I get to be the thermostat of my home. What do I mean by that? I get to set the temperature, and you get to set the temperature of what the tone and atmosphere and attitude is. We have tremendous influence as wives and mothers over the atmosphere spiritually and emotionally and mentally in our home, the attitude. Because if I had walked up to my husband that day freaking out about the fact that there was no food and how are we going to eat and what are we going to do, we're out of food, he would have also freaked out. He would have been more stressed. It would have added to the burden he was already feeling of, how am I going to provide for my family right now because my job isn't making enough money and I'm not entirely sure where to go next, because in that particular season things were rather limited options. And it would have added to that burden and increased his stress level and caused anxiety and stress and fear and worry in him. And it would have also caused angst in our daughter. Even though she didn't necessarily know what was happening, she would have felt the energy and would have had angst. But because I chose to step into faith with the Lord and trusting on the Lord and relying on him as my source, I was able to go to my husband from a place of peace and invite him into that space. And so although he also had, of course, the initial gut reaction of like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? He was able to acclimate to the temperature I was at of, well, God's got this. It's all right. We will survive. And move forward with our day. Okay? And so that's what we did. We gathered our things. We headed out the door. On the way out the door, we checked the mail, because we usually checked the mail in the morning in that season. So we checked the mail. In the mailbox is an envelope with no return address. And I open it, and hand, like, written on, like, the hand addressed to me and or my family, to us, to our family. So I open it, and in it is a blank piece of paper folded around a $100 bill. To this day, I have no idea who sent that. I don't know. There was no return address. No one wrote. There was no letter. The paper was blank that the money was wrapped in. And the postmark was from somewhere that could be anybody. Like, it wasn't a particularly standout postmark. And so, but we had a $100 bill. There was a $100 bill in that, which in that season was enough that if I was very smart about what my grocery list was, I could go to our local discount grocery market, and buy at least a week's worth of groceries for my husband and I, and some extra baby food for my daughter. And it would cover that groceries for at least a week, if not a little longer, depending on what I got and how I stretched it. And so at that moment, both of my husband and I, we just were like shocked. It was just one of those like, only God. Like, we weren't really we hadn't told a bunch of people like how tight things were and how challenging things were financially. As a matter of fact, I didn't even tell this story until within the last couple of years. Like, I didn't actually even tell people this story until several months after it happened, till we were out of that season and my husband had a new job that amply provided for our needs. This was a season and it wasn't out of trying to hide and be overly private. It was just in a season of knowing that I felt like the Lord was working on us in, are you going to trust me? Are you going to run to me to meet your needs and to provide for you and to trust? And are you going to put your trust in me? And so that's the season we were in. And so, no one knew how tight things were. I mean, my family knew that things were tight, but they didn't know how tight until recently. So, so honestly, like, to this day, I'm like, I have no idea. It was God. It was totally God must have put on somebody's heart to send us a $100 bill anonymously. And it was just it really just was such a God moment. And really it was such a tangible reminder of, like, in the Lord's Prayer, one of the things that we're told to pray, right, is give us today our daily bread. And it was one of those really practical, like, literally the Lord gave us our daily bread that day. And so I want to encourage you that if you are in a season of financial struggle, you're not alone. And like, there's a sense of like, well, yeah, we're in a recession and there's lots of inflation and people are really struggling financially in this season of life right now. In the worldwide, there's quite a lot of financial turbulence. But so on the one, like, yes, none of us are alone. None of us are untouched by the world right now and the financial turbulence of the world. But if you're in a season like the one I just described, where it's like, literally, like, I don't know how I'm going to feed my family today, God's got you. I want to encourage you that when you change, when you change your focus from what you lack to what you have and to expectation. Now, this isn't some like, oh, name it and claim it and your life's going to be hunky-dory when you accept the Lord and trust in Him and everything will be perfect and you'll never have any struggle and always have enough money. That's a bunch of baloney, okay? Anybody who tells you that, it's a bunch of baloney. Jesus promised that we're going to actually struggle in this life. There is going to be trouble. There's going to be tribulation. There's going to be trial. There's going to be testing. Becoming a Christian doesn't automatically mean that, like, all of a sudden you're going to have health, wealth, and happiness for the rest of your life. That's not how it works. But you can trust that your bare minimum needs will be met when you choose to trust in the Lord. When you seek after Him and submit to Him, He will meet you where you are and meet your needs, your real needs and your deepest needs, your true needs. And sometimes that looks very different than we think it should. And sometimes he takes much longer than we want him to show up tangibly. But I can promise you from my personal experience and from what I've read in the Bible that he wants to show up. He wants to show himself true and real for you. And so when you choose to shift your focus from what you are lacking and from fear is faith that the thing you don't want is going to happen. Fear is trusting in and actually drawing towards you the very thing that you don't want, because that is what you're focusing on and meditating on. And what you focus on and meditate on is what you go towards and what you draw towards you. And so if you shift from the lack and focus instead of on what you're lacking on God, the God who can provide, the God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, the God who loves you and made you, and you focus on him and trusting in him and seeking his heart and seeking to align your heart with his. He promises in Psalms that when you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. So when you shift to delight yourself in him, the desires of your heart will be fulfilled. Maybe not immediately, but they will be when you, in the long run, in the long game, you play the long game, and it will. And so I just want to encourage you with that today. If this was a blessing to you, please share it with your friends. If you have a story of how God has miraculously showed up and provided for you and you want to share it, please email me. My email is amanda@amandakstout.com. Send me an email and we can get a time, and I'd love to interview you and feature feature you in this series on God's provision. And I'll see you guys next week with another testimony, and I hope that this was a blessing to you. If you really liked this content, hit subscribe and save as well so that you don't miss any more of our awesome stories that are to come.